welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have on Grace. Hi, Grace. How are we doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Obviously, we kind of work together at Teambuildr, but the thing that I always speak about is you actually never know the amount of talent that Teambuildr has as coaches, because like we're all just like remote workers, and then like we get to speak to each other and like talk shop, and then we're like, actually no, he's worked everywhere and she's worked everywhere. So if you let us know who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are. As a strength coach and a business owner, my time is quite limited. My favorite part about being a coach is the fact that I get to interact with athletes and be with athletes and really coach them. That's why I use Teambuildr. I remember the days of searching for exercises, manually typing them in, and spending hours on spreadsheets and organizing my programs. This tends to be quite tedious and a lot of time consuming, which meant that I wasn't able to coach as much. So now for my business, Teambuildr is a non-negotiable. It's an all-in-one programming platform that lets you create and deliver workouts to your athletes just in a few clicks. With Teambuildr, I can customize programs, track athletes' progress in real time, and generate performance reports. My athletes get full ownership of their progress and can even share feedback on how they felt the session's going. Having this in place actually gives me more time to coach and be with my athletes. If you're ready to take your next step in your programming, give more time to your athletes, head over to teambuildr.com and use promo code PAChalkup, that's PACHALQUP, and start your 30-day free trial.
Yeah, for sure. So I graduated from Cedarville University with an exercise science degree back in 2017. And then right after I graduated, I started working in like the personal training space and working with Gen Pop. I actually was working for the Hershey Company. So at their corporate fitness center, they had pretty much where their sales and marketing teams were in. They had a fitness center, and so I worked in there, and it was really fun, really awesome first job. And then my husband is a soccer coach, so we've moved around quite a bit. So we ended up moving to a part of northeastern Pennsylvania, and that's where I started working in sports performance. So I began working for a physical therapy facility and doing some sports performance there, and that's what kind of got me into that. I started working as well with college teams, mainly actually with the teams that he was coaching. So I started off working with like some D3 soccer teams. I did a little bit of softball, a little bit of baseball, and then we ended up moving again. So he currently works at Cedarville as the men's assistant coach, and so I obviously followed along. And so I do some coaching on the side with the women's team, and that's actually I played for the team, so it's cool to be a part of that again. And obviously, like you said, I work full time for Teambuildr, but it is awesome that gives me the flexibility to be able to coach on the side and to like scratch that itch whenever I like. So, yeah, that's kind of who I am.
100%. That's something that I like about Teambuildr as well. Is like they actually encourage you to still keep active with that coaching role and that performance side of it. I did want to ask you a couple of questions. How does it feel coaching the team that you played on, and like how is that dynamic with them knowing that you are a previous player and that you did achieve a lot with that team as well?
I think it helps a lot because I've been in their shoes and they know that. And, anything that I tell them to do, essentially, like I have done myself before. So I think that's really cool. And just having an understanding of what it means to be an athlete at that level, you know, dealing with challenging schedules, time management, even stuff like that, not even the soccer aspect necessarily. I just have a decent understanding of it because I went through it, and I think they're more bought into things that I have to say because I've been through what they're going through.
I think it's always a great connect when coaches played at a really high level and then they get to coach at like the same level or higher. Because like there's always that transfer where, like for myself, I'm a good, well, I believe to be a good coach because I went through the training and I can apply the same principles I went and be like, I know that this part is tough because I've been through it. So I know when to motivate you. I know when to like, let's go, let's push. I know you're empty, there's nothing there, but you have this little bit extra to go. Is that sort of similar to what you feel the transfer is?
Yeah, it's very similar. And obviously, the strength and conditioning program has changed since I was a student. We actually didn't even have one necessarily. We didn't have strength coaches. So at least there's that positive aspect of it. But in terms of like, the fitness tests and, you know, how hard or like early morning lifts, stuff like that, it's like
Mhm.
I went through that too. So I feel like I'm just able to connect with them on a deeper level because of that.
Yeah, part of that as well. And I love that you mentioned that you worked with Gen Pop to start off with, because there's nothing that teaches you more like that interpersonal skills and how to deal with people than working with Gen Pop, where you're actually having to care and give a shit about what is coming through your door. How does that sort of influence your programming and how you deal with athletes?
Yeah, I kind of liked that starting point because obviously with Gen Pop, it's going to be different because they aren't athletes and
Mm,
you have to take that into consideration. But I feel like you're able to really focus on like the wellness aspect of things, which I feel like sometimes gets a little bit lost on the athlete side of things. Like we forget about that stuff. But with Gen Pop, like they're obviously always interested in like losing weight or
mm.
gaining muscle. And so nutrition comes into play and sleep comes into play and things like that. So I feel like it was always a easier segue to like educating them. And generally they're very open to that kind of thing and they want to know more as opposed to with an athlete, they might not ask those questions.
You're also really big on the educational side, and you've been doing quite a bit on your Instagram. One that I really loved was I think it was this one. No, there. The recovery element of performing and being recovered enough to then go. Can you sort of speak on the importance of the educational pieces that you put forward to your team?
Yeah, definitely. So I find that obviously, we can tell our athletes, like, let's say they're going on summer break or winter break or something like that, like, take care of your bodies or like over the weekend, take care of your bodies. And it's like, okay, like, what does that mean? Like, obviously, yes, it's important to say that, but giving them practical tools to actually make those decisions on their own, I think is really important. So, like, that post in particular was about sleep. And it's like, okay, we're constantly saying, okay, our athletes need to sleep like 7+ hours a night or whatever, but what are some ways that they can actually do that?
Mm,
So I always like to give them practical tips like, okay, don't drink caffeine past 12 o'clock, like in the afternoon, because that's probably a massive issue that college students have. They're always going to want to drink coffee or caffeine. So stuff like that, or like wear a sleeping mask. Like probably most college students don't do that or have one, and that can be something that can be helpful. And so just practical tips like that they can actually implement day to day, I think is really helpful.
mm,
And even with like recovery as a whole too, like there's obviously so many different components of recovery, but even like mobility stuff, obviously we do that as a team within our training sessions, but giving them those tools as well to do that on their own and not just say, hey, go do mobility this weekend. Actually like giving them the workout to go through.
mm.
And I know a lot of people do that now with training apps and stuff like that, but I think it's just super helpful to be more specific
Yeah.
and to educate them on those things so then that way when they're on their own, they can do it and be successful.
Yeah, a lot of some of the coaches that I've researched into and been fortunate enough to speak with, they actually created like these info packs where it's like a 10-page, 20-page document on like nutrition. They break down the program, the warm ups, the recovery elements. So, like at these programs, they're more inclined to be like, go see the physio, where they're actually in a room where the physio is taken care of. So all they have to do is just attend and tell them, "Hey, I've got a sore hamstring," and then they treat them from there. But it's like it's breaking down that what should I be doing question that they might get in their heads, where they are wanting to do their best, they are wanting to perform, but then like, what do I do? And I think with education being such a big piece of high like performance, I think having one-to-one sessions is also amazing, and the way that you're doing it, like with your posts, like it gives not just your athletes uh, a sense of what they should be doing, but like a wider reach as well. How have you found the engagement with your posts and athletes that you are coaching?
I think it's been really helpful actually, and I've had more athletes message me questions about certain things because of it. And actually the other day I had an athlete message me about like what snacks can I have in my dorm room? And that's a pretty, that's a pretty common question. So I was able to just lay out some snacks for throughout the day before training and even like breakfast options because, if somebody doesn't want to wake up earlier, they
Mhm.
just want to grab something quick. So I was able to give her those options, and I did, like that even made me think like, hey, I could actually just message this out to the whole team, so then everybody has that resource. And so I just think little stuff like that can go a long way, where you're actually giving them like specific things. And obviously, I'm not going to give her like a meal plan, but I'm just like, hey, you can have some Greek yogurt with fruit for your breakfast, or like some oatmeal, or like an apple or banana before training. So things like that I think are really
Mhm.
practical and helpful for them.
100%. I also think, and we did this at UW, it was like that pre, during, post session nutrition. And I'll give Ali Vanderberg a big shout because she broke it down so easily that even like a meathead like me understood what the difference was between like a pre, a during, and the post session like snack should look like. And I think that's a really key thing for them to as well, especially like if you have athletes that can't eat in the morning. Like I definitely had a few, and I was just like, I know the session you're about to have. At least like try something. Like
Yep.
we had, I forget what you used to call them, but it's like those little squeeze packets. They're like
The
fruit
like
something.
the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
applesauce ones.
yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah,
go-go
applesauce.
squeeze. Yep.
So I was like, just smash an applesauce, get at least some calories in you, and then I knew after the session they get shakes. So like high protein, calcium's in there. It's heavy, but it's got all the protein, all the necessary nutrients to recover them for the next session. Is that like? Do you do some? Did you consider something like similar, like with the pre, during, post, or was it just like?
Yeah, I always think like it's important in terms of timing of nutrition. I think that's really helpful. You do always get like, especially with the earlier lifts and things like that, people skipping out on that. So we always try to encourage them to even have something really simple like a like the go-go squeeze, or even like literally like a bite of a granola bar, like I feel
Mhm.
like is going to be more helpful than nothing. So yeah, I always definitely encourage them that, and let them know like the timing of your nutrition is important as well.
Yeah. What's the other sort of educational pieces that you place a great importance when building out their program?
I think especially for soccer, so we pretty much have implemented doing some speed training
Mm,
prior to the training sessions. So pretty much like I'll run the warm up, and then like once or twice a week I'll do a speed session. And especially if I'm trying to develop their top speed, or we're sprinting at max efforts, for them it's, or at least just for soccer players in general, at least in America, it is just super common to just have them jog in between things and always be
mm,
moving. Like even just coming off the field to get a drink, you're jogging. Going back on to the field, you're jogging. So when I told them, like when I first introduced this, and it's like we did a 20-yard max sprint and I have them walking back, they're like confused because they're like, we're not supposed to walk. Like we're supposed to be working on our fitness during this time. And so like that was confusing. And then it's like, okay, well, I need to educate them on why we're doing this. Like your body needs to recover. We're not necessarily trying to develop your conditioning adaptation at this moment. Like we're working on your speed. So you need that walk back for your body to be able to recover and do another max effort sprint. So being able to educate them on why we're doing something, and showing them, yeah, this is not hurting you, this is actually helping you, it was something that, yeah, a little hurdle that we had to get over. But once they understand it, they're definitely more bought into it. And then I think another concept along those lines is like, let's say an athlete is returning back to injury, and I'm having them
mm,
do like an 80% max sprint. So obviously not full out right away. Like you're still going to give me 100% effort in that 80% sprint. So I think those are two really big concepts that I've
Mhm.
implemented on our team.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, it's that whole um, principle of the intent training where you may not feel like walking back is doing something, but it's that intentional recovery. It's that I've given you 100%. That was intentional. Now let me recover intentionally so I can perform again the perfect rep. And it's like we all know that there's no one single rep that's the same as the previous one. But if we at least make sure that they're as best as we can for that set, that is still a greater adaptation than just half-assing a rep just to do the rep. Like my rugby coach always had this saying, it was perfect practice makes perfect. He hated practice makes perfect because like you can practice shit and
Yeah.
you expect it to be perfect, but no, he was like perfect practice makes perfect, so let's make sure that every single rep, every single set is as perfect as we can get it. um on that, what's your take on training for conditioning versus top speed training? So what I mean is there's coaches that will look at athletes speed training, say, and they're like, oh yeah, jog back so you can go again. So that would sort of tailor more to the conditioning side. But when you're like what you mentioned, top speed training is like you actually need that time to recover. You actually need that time to restore all the energy, resources to go again. What's your take on those two differences?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there is a time and place for both. You just can't really like intermix the two
Hmm.
because, yeah, you're not going to elicit the adaptations that you want. So I think being very clear with the sport coach too is important as well, and communicating like this is why we're walking back. You know, we're trying to like this is the goal of today's session, and being clear with the goal. And then obviously for a conditioning session, letting them know what the goal is. And this is why we're jogging in between our sprints, because that's more so what the focus is. And yeah, I think like just being very clear with working hard when it is time to work and resting hard when it's time to rest. And even like not even just during a training session, but during the summer, like letting the athletes or guiding the athletes to have an understanding of when it is time to rest, when it is time to work, and especially if they want to do extra work, like in
Hmm.
between or prior to practice, after practice, helping them know if that's a good idea or not, because every athlete's going to look different, and you obviously don't want them to overwork. So you really need to put an emphasis on resting when it's time to rest, and then working hard when it's time to work.
Yeah, I think it's always a good thing to clear up with the head coach specifically. Now, soccer is that unique sport where not all head coaches will consider the strength coach as an important piece. So it's like making them understand why we're doing something the way that we're doing. And I've spoke to many soccer coaches, and I hate saying soccer so much.
I believe it. Sorry, that's my fault.
It's all good. um, but it's that thing where because S&C hasn't always been an important thing in soccer, that when we're saying, hey, we actually need to decrease the load for this week, but then the coach goes just makes them run like or play five aside, three aside, whatever it is, like very quick, short bursts of. So I was essentially saying that when coaches make them then run in practice, so like for the warm up, they make them do laps or they make them play three aside, five aside when you've actually programmed for a reduced load that set. Although you're working with your husband, so that communication will probably be very easy. Like what would be some of your ways and to communicate with the coach that like, hey, actually they need to back off because this is what the program says and this is what we're trying to elicit later down the road.
Yeah, I think especially having some type of activity tracker or GPS tracker is really helpful for that. So we use something called Beyond Pulse, which is a pretty basic activity tracker, and it gives essentially an overall workload average for the team, and then it also will give obviously individual averages for each player. So we've kind of developed a system with our head coach and assistant coach of like I'll kind of give an idea of what the workload needs to be for that day. And pretty much we've made like over time, we've made this database of activities that we've done
Mm,
and drills that we've done during the sessions and have pretty much attributed a workload to that activity. So then when we are planning practice, we kind of have an understanding of how much workload is going to be per activity, and then they can kind of plan out the day based on what the workload will be. So I'll kind of give them a goal, and it's obviously based on like, did we just have a game? There's a game coming up in 2 days, so like that's what the number is going to be based off of, obviously. And then they're going to be able to make decisions based on that number.
hmm. What's your take on the importance of accumulative data in that sense, where you really, because you've spent so much time with them, you actually know exactly where they will be at which points?
Yeah, so I think that it's really helpful for predicting things in the future, but also having an understanding of each individual athlete as well. And yeah, I mean, I think like I think getting coaches to buy into that type of thing
Mhm.
can be difficult, and just like I guess activity trackers in general, and have sometimes like taking an interest in that because they potentially want to just do what they think needs to be done for the training session when that's not always true because of workload. So yeah, I think like taking a look to at the whole, so like a more cumulative view of the workload is really important, especially if it's been like a really hard week or a really hard month, kind of giving them an understanding of like where that or how much load that athlete has taken on.
Mhm. What's your tactics and strategies to manage the workload on soccer is predominantly year long seasons? What's the sort of load management look like for your athletes?
Yeah, so I think that obviously in season it's going to look a little bit different because of competition, but even just at the individual athlete level, if somebody isn't playing that much, their workload's going to look different. So normally what I'll do is I'll try and give them like a goal to hit for the week. So if it's an
Mhm.
athlete that didn't really play and we can see like their training load was like, if I'll just use random numbers for example. So let's say a starter's workload is 100 for the week. Then you've got a a second player or a substitute whose workload is, we'll say, like 50. So it's like you need to somehow make up that ground to stay fit. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 100 because
Mhm.
they might not be at that level, but it's like you probably should make up 20, um, like 20 trimps pretty much is what the metric
Yeah,
is, training impulse. So
I
that's
love
kind of
Trent
what
too.
what we have them do. Yeah.
Hmm.
So so like giving them a specific number I think is really helpful. So it's like when they do, and I give them workouts to do too, like some ideas to do on the side if they have to go out early. And then even during the summer, kind of giving them some workload goals because it's really hard to tell. It's really hard to, I guess, have a similar workload in the summer than it is compared to like in season when you're playing with your team and you have 2 matches a week. Like it's hard to replicate that, but I
Hmm.
think having some specific numbers really helps as well.
100%. Um, I love that you mentioned workload, but increasing instead of decreasing. Um, as you know, a lot of conversations in this industry are now talking about like the decreasing in load and why load is like the bad guy and increasing is wrong. I actually had an episode with Steph Grubbs, and she was like, again, this is the thing where like, people aren't in my head, so they don't know what I'm thinking. But I was asking about work, the load management or workload, and she was like, actually, I think that's a very topical question because everyone's talking about decreasing, but I love that you mentioned that you actually need to increase it as well. And the example that me and Steph were talking about was, say we have a substitute and they get like 10 minutes a game, they run 20% of what the starters did. At the end of that sort of game, they're going to have some drills or some running to supplement that. So if next week comes and the starter gets injured, he's actually got round about the same workload capacity to match the playing style, the playing intensity that we are implementing during our strategies. So I think that's we need to talk more about also increasing as decreasing as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it can be really hard in a team setting because
Mm,
you're generally having your whole team do the same thing. But something that we've been able to implement, especially on Fridays, because a lot of times we have a game on Thursday and a game on Saturday, is we'll take a look at the workload from the game on Thursday and we'll say,
mm,
all right, these players need to specifically just do a recovery session. So first at the beginning of the session, we have like everybody do the recovery, and then halfway through we split and we say these players are gonna continue to recover, and then these players are gonna play some small sided games and like get that fitness in. So we have been able to implement that, but yeah, like it might not work out with every sport
mhm,
coach because they might not want to do that. But I think trying to separate it a little bit, and I know it's can seem exclusive potentially to the players, and we do kind of let them choose, like we give them some autonomy in that. Like if a player thinks that they can, and they really didn't, they might have worked like a medium amount. Sometimes we'll just let them go play. Or like if one of the substitutes is like really not feeling good, we'll let them recover. So there is some like autonomy in that, but I think
mhm.
it's good to kind of try and separate it a little bit.
Yeah, when I was at college, one of my lecturers, so she plays for the Scottish Masters in hockey. She's been to the Olympics. She's a phenomenal athlete. But now she coaches the development squads for Scotland field hockey. I should have mentioned that. So what her strategy is they all have heart rate monitors, and they get to spend 7 minutes within the red zone. Anything more than that, they get subbed off and someone else goes on. So it's like because they've got rolling subs, they can do that. And I've always found that very interesting because it's a different way of looking at load management and recovery zones. And again, the more time you spend bouncing between both, the quicker your recovery is. So the more time they can like roll these subs out, which I found that very fascinating. I was
Yeah,
geeking out.
that is really interesting.
Um, and again, not all teams can afford heart rate monitors, so it can be, and not all sports are able to have heart rate monitors on. But it's a good way to at least see how different coaches are management like and managing their sort of athletes' loads during the games.
Yeah, that's awesome. The activity tracker that we use does have heart rate monitor, but it is retroactive, so it's not live data.
Mm,
So you have to go back and look at it, which it can still be useful. Like if you think that a player is potentially not working as hard as they should be, then you can kind of use that
hmm
and just say like, why is your heart rate so low? And it does get smarter in that it knows that athlete's heart rate, so it gives you an idea of like how often they're spending above like 80% of their max heart rate. So I think that it can be useful, like even
hmm
though it's not live data, it's still helpful for us.
Yeah. What's the variation in sort of their like when we're now talking about like the menstrual cycle? How is that variation between like their normal weeks and when they're actually menstruation? Do you see a clear difference between heart rates and sort of metrics that go into it?
Yeah, so I actually haven't seen, so we haven't done a ton of like tracking with in terms of menstrual cycle. It's something that I'm looking into right now, so I actually don't have an answer for you there. But
Okay.
I do still think like it's important to to start to look at that and to like educate them on those
hmm
things, because you can potentially help minimize certain symptoms throughout the menstrual cycle, and potentially reduce injury risk as well.
Yeah, I've always found that fascinating because not a lot of sports considers it to be effective, and the way that research is going is getting more emphasis on specific training from female athletes. And this is the issue that I'm having is a lot of the physiological papers will say that there's no difference, but then you sort of get into the methods section where it's like there's so not all females, especially at high performance, will have normal menstrual cycles. Again, some may have
Right.
PCOS, raised testosterone. There could be irregular. Like gymnastics is the worst because of the way that
Right.
they have to look and feel. So most of them won't get menstrual cycles in general, or they will have, but it's all over the place. So it's like, what athletes are you actually getting in? How can we make that a little bit more specific to actually identify some differences? Because saying that there's outright no difference, I feel is wrong because there
Yes.
will
Yep.
be certain differences. Like you are a high performance athlete, so you might be able to touch on this a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I even think like, okay, let's say these papers didn't find any necessarily like objective data that was different. There's probably some like subjective data at least that would be
Mhm,
different throughout the phases of the menstrual cycle, just because you're probably more fatigued at some points. You're probably feel more bloated. You probably are feeling like potentially more sore. So like there's things that you can do, at least in my opinion, that can help like mitigate some of those symptoms, even if it's not necessarily a performance issue. So like
mhm,
during like let's say like the last phase of your menstrual cycle, when you're starting like the when the next phase is the onset of your period, like you're starting to potentially be more fatigued, your potentially your mood is probably up and down. You might have to start thinking of things like, is there something that I can be eating that can help
mm,
reduce the inflammation in my body? Is there should I really be I should really be focusing on sleep during this phase? So I think there's definitely things that we can do as coaches to help our athletes minimize their symptoms, at least, like not even from a perspective, but I do think that will ultimately help their
mhm.
performance if they just feel better too.
Have you seen an increase in awareness for female athletes, and how has that sort of helped with everything that you do?
Yeah, I think that at least nowadays, athletes and coaches are becoming more aware of the importance of tracking the menstrual cycle. And I think there are positives to it and there's also negatives to it. I think in terms of like, I know that my body could be weaker during this period. So like that could kind of get into your head,
Mm,
and it's not like on a game day you're going to reduce their load because they are on their period, or like you're just not going to do that. So like that could be potentially be a negative that it gets in their head. But I think ultimately it's a positive thing because they can really take care of their body during a time that they really need to, and hopefully just make them feel better and minimize the symptoms. So yeah, I think that athletes are just becoming more aware of that in
mm.
general too.
What does the sort of sessions look like on a day to day and sort of week to week when they do have some like weekend games and some midweek games?
So for the most part, we have two matches a week, and it generally is Thursday, Saturday. Some weeks you would have like a Wednesday, Saturday
Mm,
schedule. But yeah, so normally on Mondays is, or so for the school that I'm at, Sunday is the off day. Monday is kind of still like a recovery day. Tuesday is more of like a get after it day, like you can really
mm,
increase the workload. Wednesday is a little bit lighter, but you can still get some stuff done because it's a pre-game day. Then you've got game day, and then that Friday is generally a pretty, like I said, it's either recovery for some people or a little bit more intense for other athletes. And then Saturday is another match day. So that's kind of like the flow, at least in season. And then we'll generally have like a lift probably on Monday, and then sometimes we'll do like a pregame lift throughout the
mm.
week at some point. So like a more like a CNS driven lift at some point. So
Yeah. What's the sort of what principles do you carry to sort of match that game load for them?
so I think again, I think like going back to helping the coach understand what workload should be attributed to a certain day. So like Tuesdays again are it's been 2 days since we've had a
Mhm,
match, and it'll be another 2 days since we have another match. So saying like, hey, we can work at you know, I'll give them a workload of like 18 to 20. Like we can try and shoot for that as an average for the team. So I think that really helps try and keep their fitness level up,
Mhm.
obviously, but also still get some stuff done. Because if you're if you're just trying to do a bunch of like recovery practices, it can be really hard to just get things done that you need to get done within a training session. So I think giving them a goal that still allows them to have like one
Mhm.
training day of like intense work is I think really helpful as well.
Is there any fluctuation depending on game importances or game, like if it's an easy game, a harder game? Is there any fluctuation within these loads in there?
Yeah, so I would say it would be more so like after the game, because you obviously don't want to be like, oh, it's an easy opponent coming up. We're gonna work really hard because
Blast 'em.
sometimes,
Mhm.
yeah, like sometimes they play you really well. So it's more so like an after effect. So if we played a lot of players, like let's say we played 20 players in a game, the workload is obviously spread out amongst those players. So then, I'll take a look at that and say, okay, we actually can bump it up today because we didn't have as hard of a game on Saturday. So maybe Monday we can go a little bit harder. So yeah, that definitely comes into play for sure.
How is that sort of then split into what is actually done? Is it like more running, more gym work? Like how does it look like?
So we actually pretty rarely just do straight up running in season. It would be more like the activities that we choose during training. So if it's a more intense day, we'll potentially have some more, like obviously small sided games can be intense because of like the mechanical workload of changing direction and things like that.
Mhm.
So we'd probably add some stuff like that, but also some full field, like
Mm.
11v11 type stuff as well, and then just activities that are more intense and have like rest periods between, but still just like picking those activities that are more intense and the workload is going to be higher. So
With the demands of the change of directions and accelerations, decelerations of the sport itself, how do you program and manage the health of their knees and sort of mitigate those risk injuries?
that's a great question. So again, the activity tracker that we use, it doesn't necessarily account for decelerations, unfortunately, but it does tell us a little bit about their high speed running. So I always try and have, so like I said, Tuesdays are normally that day where we can go hard. So normally we'll do some like 40-yard max sprints on those days and get some of that high speed running in and try and get them to reach their 100% max sprint, because obviously during practices and games sometimes you don't sprint that fast. So trying to elicit that adaptation and like actually get their top speed higher is one thing that we try and do throughout the week, and obviously that's just going to help with like hamstring injuries and things like that,
Mm.
like getting them exposed to that type of running I think is important. So yeah, just having an understanding of like what the workload will look like for the week is really helpful when planning on a specific day. Like we can add
Mhm.
some more high speed running in on this day.
Yeah. How does that then look like for the mitigation work in the gym?
Yep. So great question. So I think like if it's a, like let's say that their workload wasn't as high in a game on a Saturday, then on Monday when we have our lift, they can potentially do some more like, because sometimes we'll do some deceleration stuff in the weight room as well. So adding a little bit more of that type of stress throughout the week because the workload wasn't necessarily as
Mhm.
high, and then obviously adding in some like isometric exercises as well, and yeah, and just things like that.
Yeah, I've always loved the. Again, I'm a big posterior chain guy, so I love blasting posterior chain. But the health benefits from doing some of that and the mitigation aspect of ACL injuries is actually phenomenal. Especially when, again, I always feel like I'm sexist when I say this, but genuinely, females do have smaller tendons than men, so
Hmm.
it is a greater importance that needs to be placed on that. How much of the posterior chain do you put an emphasis on within the program?
Yeah, definitely a lot. I think like during season we'll kind of limit some of the
Hmm.
eccentrics, but still you're still going to be working the posterior chain.
It's more like that
So,
maintenance aspect of it.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly. So like that's super important. Obviously doing like, RDLs, single leg RDLs, and even just like bridges, the sliding bridges, stuff like that I think is really, really useful just to improve and increase the capacity of your posterior chain.
Mhm. I like to think of the hamstring as having like two work points. So like you've got your hip dominance side, and then you've got your like knee dominance side. So I like to call it like the two insertions as opposed to like insertion and origin. You have two elements that you can work on. Um, Again, I was taught this by Coach AJ, so I have to give full credit to him. But it's like the importance that you should place on the full range of movement and getting them strong from point A to point B. So essentially, every muscle will have that same concentric and eccentric, but you need to make it stronger throughout. In terms of your program, what are some other considerations that you place a great emphasis on when it comes to helping them keep up with the load and the performance?
Yeah, one thing in general that we consider is also what like the sport coach wants.
Hmm.
Sometimes it can be hard to again get them to buy in to lifts because it makes their athletes sore or potentially makes their athletes sore. So when they hear like, "Oh, I'm really sore today," and like then maybe that athlete doesn't play as well in training or something like that, or we had a really a tough lift on Monday and we lose our game on Thursday, like they're just going to straight up attribute that to the
Hmm.
lift. And so I think working with them on having an understanding first of all of why it's important, and then basically like explaining like there's so many other factors involved with performance,
Hmm.
and that they need to be doing this stuff for the athlete's health and just their overall athletic performance, I think. So that's kind of one consideration that is more so from the coaching side
Hmm.
that I normally talk about with the coaches, and that it can sometimes be a little sticking point as well.
Yeah. How have you found the best way to get that coach buy-in as an S&C coach in a soccer sort of industry?
Yeah, I think like just explaining the benefits of the lifts, and then also kind of like breaking down like if they really care about what we're doing specifically, like breaking down why we're doing each exercise. Generally that doesn't really happen all the time, but sometimes it is like take some compromise. Like if we're finding that potentially some athletes are having like some back issues after doing like
Mm-hmm.
hang cleans or something like that, like obviously we might just totally move on from that and just supplement it with, like med ball slams or something along those lines. So still working with the sport coach and what they want, because that's obviously important, because you don't want them to get to the point where it's just like, all right, we're just not going to lift at all because people are getting sore or they're saying they have back pain and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's important to compromise as well.
Yeah. What's a hill that you would die on in this industry?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I think I think like implementing max sprinting into
Mm.
training sessions prior, like generally after the warm up, that is a hill that I will die on. I think it's so important because you just don't realize how sometimes within a game, like you might like especially sport coaches or just people who aren't super familiar with things, you're gonna think like, oh, they are sprinting maximally in a game because they're going as hard as they can. But it's like, no, they potentially don't have enough room to get to that
Mhm.
top speed because there's obviously so many other factors. They're either, they either have the ball at their feet, or if they're making a run, it's going to be probably not 40 to 50 yards long max speed. There's just so many other factors involved. So that's something that I would always implement in a training week, and it's at least that I think is really important for sport coaches to
Mhm.
start to buy into. So
Yeah. Also, teaches them a little bit on like the dark side, which I like to call, which is like when you feel like you have nothing to give, but you still have to give something. It's like that extra 1% sprint ability that you can tap into once you've done it for so many times. And again, the ball element added onto their feet, obviously speed gets reduced. So if you've got that worked on, you can actually get a little bit faster to the ball or with the ball.
Exactly.
What is one piece of advice that you would give new strength coaches or coaches coming into this industry?
I think one piece of advice that was really helpful for me was to just be yourself and to not try and like obviously take information from and advice from other coaches and take their, if you're looking at the way they program and their periodization and things like that, like yes, take those things, they're super important, but like make it your own and I guess buy into your personality. Like I always felt like I struggled. Like I don't have a super bubbly personality. And so for me, when I coach, it's pretty like relaxed and I don't necessarily get super fired up. And I think like for me, when I would see a coach do that, I'd be like, I want to be like that. But that's just like not how I am at all. And I think just like accepting that and there are positives to both of those coaching styles. So yeah, I would just say be yourself and just be confident in who you are.
Yeah, I think athletes will pick up on that too. Like if you're trying to be something that you're not comfortable being, like they'll be like, "There's something off," and then
Yeah,
it
exactly.
creates that weird dynamic where it's like they don't really know how to take you because like you could switch from one second to the other. 100%, I agree, and it's that thing where again we do all want to be the best coaches that we can be. First and foremost, we need to consider the people that we're coaching and what their needs are. It's not always about us and how we want to coach or want to be. It's about giving them the best opportunity to have the best career
Yep.
possible.
Yep. Exactly.
What's some resources or books that you found helpful when going through this industry?
Yeah, I think um, there are some like periodization books out there. Like obviously, triphasic training is
Mm,
really helpful by Cal Dietz. I think that there's a book called Practical Programming too. That's really helpful. I forget who writes it. And then also when I started working into baseball, Movement Over Maxes is really good, which you can take a lot from that and apply it to all sports. Um, yeah, so those are three really good books. And then in terms of like blog articles, obviously Team Builder's got some really good blogs. A little
yep.
shameless plug there. So yeah, I think that's really really awesome. Obviously, this podcast, and then also
Thank you.
Pacey Performance Podcast is really good as well. That's a pretty high level podcast too. So
Mhm.
those are probably my top
The
resources.
the amount of high level coaches that Pacey gets on is phenomenal. Again, he's been doing this
Yeah,
for so long as well, so it's always great. And like I've because of Team Builder, I've had the fortunate opportunity to speak with him like one to one basis, and it's like he's so nice too, which is like you're doing great and you're nice.
exactly. It's an incredible combination.
If you let everyone know where they can find you and how to get some of the coaching element educational pieces that you talk about.
Yeah. So my Instagram is coach.grace27. So feel free to look that up. That's my main source of social media. So that's pretty much all there is for me. And then I've written a few Team Builder blogs, so you can look that up as well. So
Perfect. We really appreciate you for coming on, Grace.
yeah, thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Perfect. Peace.